Hi, welcome back to The Great Rehumanization. We started talking about propaganda, and we're going to keep building on this, okay? So we already started talking about how there's two main types of propaganda: agitation propaganda and integration propaganda, okay? We also started talking about some basic assumptions about what propaganda is. So let's start there. Let's just start with our basic assumptions today and build from there. I have a few simple things to go over. The basic idea that we have about propaganda is that it's a collection of gimmicks and tricks, a brainwashing process, okay? So we have this assumption that it's pretty obvious stuff, that it's easy to point to, it's easy to figure out what is propaganda. And our basic position is that whatever information we disagree with, we call that propaganda. So it's kind of a way to cop out. It's kind of a way to distance ourselves from things that we don't agree with. Nah, that's propaganda. On the other hand, the things that we do agree with, we essentially consider that to be education and good information, right? So that's a very wrong-headed way of looking at it. It doesn't help us because it makes us more susceptible to propaganda in general. The basic way to understand propaganda, and it's not easy to understand, but it goes like this. Essentially, as human beings, we have a history. We belong to the animal kingdom, let's say. We're biological creatures with basic needs. And throughout our history, these basic needs have been pretty simple and easy to figure out. Food, shelter, clothing, reproduction, things like that. The continuation of the species. However, we are human beings, and we've created what we call a civilization. And this is mainly born out of technique and technology. Science, technology, this really big elaboration of what our basic rudimentary needs are. I mean, we've gone really far from what those are into creating a whole technological civilization, right? The best way to understand propaganda is that it's the component of our civilization that binds us to it. So in other words, all of the animals that we see in the world, in the animal kingdom and in nature, we have these adaptations, right? We've evolved to live and thrive and reproduce in our natural environments. Human beings, on the other hand, have created an environment. Yet we still have all of those biological functions, right? Those adaptive processes. And for me, like, this is just me making a little comment on the whole thing. This is my commentary. I think a lot of our mental health problems and our problems in general are sort of born out of this. That we have a difficult time adjusting to the artificial reality that we must interface with and engage day in and day out. So the technological civilization is something that maybe real parts of us, parts of our biology, are not inclined to speed up. Like, we're not really able to keep up with it on just some real biological level. I'm badly saying, I'm not a scientist, a biologist, or anything like that. So, you know what I mean? We're just going to work with basic vocabulary there and struggle with it as best as we can. But I think you follow me. So the best way to understand propaganda, I think, is as this total phenomenon made of all sorts of phenomena. So media, education, advertising. I mean, it's a great number of things that influence us, that influence our attitudes, but mainly give us the power to act. Propaganda is not about brainwashing. It's about action. It's about getting us to do something in the world. And it's usually very specific things. But there's also a long game to it. There's a propaganda that's more overt and immediate. Mostly that agitation propaganda that plays on our immediate needs and things like that. That really works with our resentments. And then there's a longer game to propaganda, an integration propaganda that is more about bringing us together over time and conditioning us to accept processes that play out a little bit longer. So I talked about agitation and integration propaganda. And again, to remind you, the compass I use for this is Jacques Ellul, E-L-L-U-L, Jacques Ellul, his book, Propaganda, The Formation of Men's Attitudes. That's the name of the book. And this was published, I believe, in 1965. I could be wrong about that, like I said before. I don't know why I don't just reach over, grab the book, and look at the copyright on that. But essentially, Ellul was doing a lot of his thinking about propaganda right after World War II. So he was really doing all the research and everything in the 50s and early 60s. The book came out in 65, I think. Anyway, that's my main thing. But there's also a lot of thinkers from that time period, Hannah Arendt, George Orwell, Huxley, who talked a lot about propaganda and related topics. So I start there after World War II because World War II in the 1930s, modern propaganda really took off then. Lenin, the Bolshevik Revolution prior to the 1910s. So the 20th century basically is where modern propaganda really develops because that's where it starts to partner up with all the sciences and the social sciences and data and technology and technique. It all starts to really come together with the totalitarian movements of the 20th century, and then in the United States, in the liberal democratic world, with our education techniques. So our propaganda would have a lot to do with Dewey, for example. Propaganda in the Soviet Union would have a lot to do with Pavlov. So propaganda in the Nazi orbit, Freud. So and not to limit those types of propaganda to those things. But Maoist propaganda, Soviet propaganda, Nazi propaganda, British and American propaganda, they all have their own kind of distinct flavors based on those cultures and societies. But 20th century is really where it starts. Again, if you hear like... That's James. I've got the 2-year-old boys, if you didn't notice that or pick up on that. So when I record videos, you'll hear a lot of that stuff going on. Mom's home today, so... they're hanging out with her while I do my thing here. But they're right out in the hallway doing something. Anyway, so back to this what propaganda is. It's all of these things. It's all of the forces that influence us, but really want us to act together, act separately. There's a long view to it, and then there's an immediate need for it. So there's different propaganda techniques. Agitation and integration are the two camps we can sort of begin to categorize them into. But the need for propaganda is what I want to kind of clarify right now. So for me, a lot of what I want to do here is just get back to this idea that we're moving into a technological future that is totally uncharted. And talking about technology and technique is going to be really something important. Because I think in more recent years, and I'm still talking about propaganda, so I'm making a little bit of a digression. In more recent years, we've gotten used to the idea that the technology that we have now is much different than anything we ever had. But this is this brewing consensus that something is different about our technique now than it ever has been is a rather new sort of awakening and understanding. Because even if we go back 10 years ago, okay, people were really, really confused on it. And the basic idea with technology has always been, well, it's a tool. Technology is just a tool. And I've been saying for like the past 20, 30 years, no, the technology that we are continually developing is not like a hammer. There's a difference in the stable function of a hammer and AI. And I think that's pretty clear to people now. So technology is kind of in the driver's seat. Well, it's really in the driver's seat. It has an autonomy to it. That was really hard to explain even 10 years ago. Look, technology is not just a simple tool. It drives the world. It is in the driver's seat. It's pulling us along now, We are adapting to it. It's a lot easier to describe than it was for me to even scratch the surface on 20 years ago. Like I was having conversations with really smart friends not that long ago, but as an adult. And they were getting really confused. I'm like, no. We aren't really in control of this situation. And it's so hard. It was so hard, especially then, 10, 20 years ago, to say, no, it's not a hammer. Not like that. That's getting easier and easier to explain. It's becoming clearer and clearer. But I'm talking about that because we haven't caught up with how the propaganda works. We don't really understand how the propaganda works with this. And the propaganda is what keeps us connected to it. Okay? So propaganda enables us to be in the world and to be of it. All things considered, it's what binds us to this reality that doesn't necessarily suit those basic needs and functions that all along, all throughout our human history, we've developed and lived according to. Okay? The basic needs. The world we live in today, it has even rearranged how we come in contact with those needs and resources. Okay, so we have a real big disconnect between ourselves and most of the food we eat, most of the products we buy. So we started talking about alienation in the 20th century especially, but the 19th century. Technology brought about a real conversation about this alienation that we feel. But I don't want to get into like Marxist theory and stuff here. That's not the point. Even if you're not a Marxist, I think it's really easy to understand. For example, I just saw a study being talked about 2 days ago about how our use of technology increases our feeling of loneliness. And there's a lot of study on that and data there. It's the propaganda that seeks to mitigate that type of thing, that loneliness and that isolation. So we are basically, to make a long story short, we are thriving on and feeding on propaganda. We need it in order to find our connectivity to this world. Okay? Clear as mud. I know it's hard to, that's why this is going to take, I'm going to have to get better at talking about it, better at clarifying, better at doing this. But I just wanted to make this quick video today to go back over that. So if we go to Romans 12:2. So my big thing is wisdom. We're going to need to lean into, so we're really disconnected from all of those needs, right? The way we obtain our food, our shelter. Technology has completely changed that and given us new needs, new pursuits, right? New possibilities. However you want to put it, the world is completely different, right? Propaganda is what binds us to it, makes us in it and of it, all right? Now, we still have the basic components of what makes us who we are. Our mind, our bodies, our spirits, okay? And the way I think we navigate where we're going is we lean into one aspect of what we've always had, and that is wisdom, okay? Our wisdom. And we can go back to the beginning to find it. The beginning of our writing, our civilization, and our storytelling. That's really important. And that's what we have inside of us to take forward with us. And I'm not talking about religion per se, but a lot of the things we might find in religion. Wisdom. Proverbs, poetry, art, music. We can find real living wisdom stretching all the way back. And while technology has progressed and the world has changed and our brains changed throughout our activities during any given day, neuroplasticity, right? We are not that much more intelligent, and especially not more wise than our great ancestors, okay? I know very few people who I would say have more wisdom than Dostoevsky. I don't know if I know anybody. Or Plato, going even further back. I mean, you can take anybody from antiquity who's saying something really intelligent and bring them here now, and they might be smarter than any given person they encounter. That's wisdom. So wisdom is something that's in us. It goes back a long way. And human beings really haven't gotten that much smarter in that sense. We're not any more wise than we were back then. Technology has changed a lot of things, right? So somebody might say, well, we don't have slaves anymore and all, We can get down to any fine detail, to anything in our world and look at it through the lens of material forces and technology. That does sound kind of like the dialectical materialism, doesn't it? That does sound a little Marxist, right? Anyway, but it's true. We can't look at our developments and say, oh, that's progress. We did that. We've made progress as human beings. So I'm touching on a subject there that we will talk about a lot more and in detail, the difference between human progress and technological progress. We've conflated the two. And that gets back to this confusing thing I was just talking about a little bit before, arguments that were really difficult to have 10, 20 years ago, when I would say, no, human progress is not the same as technological progress. Our progress as spiritual beings, as intellectual beings, is not the same as the technological progress. We've sort of stalled. Technology has evolved and taken off, and now it's pulling us along. That's easier to talk about now. So there's a distinction I've always made in that idea of progress. What is progress? And a lot of it is mythology, the myth of progress. I actually wrote a song about it. I'll break that out on you guys at some point too. So wisdom. And when I come back to wisdom, and I'll talk about this a lot, Romans 12:2 in the Bible. Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewal of our minds, right? So that we can discern, that we can approve, that we can understand what is good, what is God's will. That's what the scripture says. Do not conform, be transformed, and discern. 3 imperative things there. I think that is wisdom, and that really sums up a lot of how we can go forward. It is technique, technology, and propaganda. Propaganda binds us to the technological world. It is what conforms us, and then it is what allows our minds to see it as progress. And then from there, it's the propaganda that helps us discern what is good and pleasing. And so if we go back to the quote again, let me just read it right out of the NIV. So Romans 12:2, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So I'm going to take that part by part and describe propaganda as the twin force of the technological world that binds us to it. So the first thing it says is, do not conform to the patterns of this world. The patterns of this world are very much decided by the technology and the technique. And when I say technology and technique, this again goes back to Jacques Ellul, the same guy who wrote Propaganda, wrote a book called The Technological Society, that he wrote that before the book on propaganda. We do need to talk about this, okay? So somebody I think that would really understand a lot of these ideas would be Peter Thiel. Okay, I think Peter Thiel really understands that the world is driven more by technique than policy, for example. Politics, we feel, is our way of controlling things and setting the course and intervening in history. We do that with our politics, right? But we give too much credence to it. We take it almost too seriously while we are being completely unserious about it. Because in all reality, it's technology and technique that is changing the course of things, that is really dictating things, and we're just going along with that, and our politics haven't really kept up. So when we get to the patterns of this world, that is a technological process. Now, when I say technology, the thing that really comes to mind for most people is gadgetry, tools, buttons, wiring, components, implements, weapons. things that we use. But technology isn't just tools, like I just described, or machinery or equipment. That's why technique is a good word. It's processes too. It's application. It's step by step by step, getting from one point to the next using a process, a technique. So technology and technique, to me, I will interchange and use those words together, use them separately. But the world of process, are you following me here? This is what I'm talking about. So in Romans 12:2, do not conform to the patterns of this world. The patterns are technological. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Okay? So what propaganda then does is it conforms us to those technological patterns. Okay? And that's a lot to get into. So you can have as many questions there as you can, because we need to have a lot of questions about what I just said. All right? Now, the transforming of the renewal of your mind, okay? That also in our technological world, propaganda takes hold there, okay? In order to adjust our minds to the reality that's going on, we need a lot of propaganda. We need a lot of education and integration, and we need to be pushed and convinced, okay? And then we'll be able to test and approve what's good, what works, right? And all of that becomes technological too. And propaganda steps in right there. So propaganda steps in at all three of those levels. And we do have to talk about how and why. So start building questions about those things I'm talking about right there. So Romans 12:2, that gives us some anchoring in wisdom, I think. And you don't have to be Christian, okay? I am, and that's my lens, okay? But I've also studied a lot of other wisdom and world traditions and religions too, and we find a lot of the same thing bearing out. So today I want to leave propaganda, leave our minds kind of dwelling on these things. What is propaganda and how do we need it? Because I want us to back off the idea that propaganda is just this simple technique to brainwash us. It's not that at all. We need to look at it as a bigger phenomenon that encompasses all sorts of technique and technology to bring us in line with this civilization that is moving rapidly forward through technique and technology. So I want to leave it there for now. I'm going to start talking about integration and agitation propaganda in more detail. Okay?